Hello, I'm Rick Howie. I'm a nature photographer in Kamloops, and I'd like to share with you a few of the images that I've taken. I have tens of thousands of them, and these few indicate a little bit about my philosophy and approach to nature photography, and hopefully highlight a few of the skills that I've been able to develop over the years. Now, I also do macro photography, as I mentioned, using the 100mm lens, and I do flowers and insects and just about any other subject that comes to mind. But the flower that you see there is a Mariposa lily, one of our common grassland lilies that blooms here in the early part of summer. And I enjoyed this picture just because it has some more dramatic lighting and it gives a slightly different perspective on the flower itself. I've got lots of more standard views of that flower, but luckily the day I was out, the lighting was just right to have a bit more drama associated with it. And that's always the challenge when you're doing your photos. If you can find lighting that's more interesting, by all means, try and take advantage of it. In this case, I process all of my pictures in Lightroom and Photoshop, and I darken the background a little bit to make it stand out against the shadows. So before you will see a black and white image of Kamloops Lake, and I enjoy the color images that I've taken of various scenes around Kamloops for sure, but sometimes they appeal to me in terms of their shapes and shadows and images like that, which I think lend themselves to more of a monotone type of treatment. So I do that in Photoshop with one of the filter plugins, and in this case, Kamloops Lake looking from one of the viewpoints. So I tried to stress the shapes and shadows that were available in the landscape that day. I do other subjects as well in black and white, again, depending on exactly what kind of opportunities each image provides. Sometimes I'll go looking for that in an image. Other times it's more happenstance that it turns out after I shoot the color version, I think, boy, this would look okay in monotone as well. So that's an example of a monochrome landscape. In terms of composition, I put the log in the front there just to add a bit of textural detail instead of having the landscape fade away with nothing in the foreground. Macro photography is really a challenging game because the macro lenses do not have a very deep depth of field. That is, the image from front to back that's in focus is very shallow. So unless you're doing a subject that can allow you to take a series of images at different depths in focus and then stack them together, usually one image can provide challenges. I try to use the maximum depth of field that I can get, as well at the same time allowing a shutter speed that is fast enough to try and stop action. Usually I'm not on a tripod because insects tend to be quite mobile, so I've got to follow them around and sort of seek and stalk kind of approach. So this robber fly is handheld by following it, waiting for it to perch, and then getting in as close as I could get with a depth of field deep enough to get the entire insect in focus. Again, that's a challenge because you want to be more on the side of the insect rather than an oblique angle from front to rear, which means that the whole insect is much harder to get into focus. But I thought this turned out rather well. It's nice and sharp, nice background that is out of focus and allows the insect to stand out. These are a fairly common robber fly in the dry country here in Kamloops. So there are times when I think nature provides images which are more along the lines of an artistic impression as opposed to a specific subject that has an identity that we can all relate to, such as a flower name or an insect or whatever. So sometimes it's just colors and shapes and forms. And in this case, these were shadows and shapes and reflections in a pond that I happened to be driving by and noticed them. So I decided I better snap some images. The original image was a bit larger, and I cropped this out of that as being the most interesting portion of the image. And I think we should always keep our eyes out for this kind of art in nature kinds of images. Shooting the large charismatic megafauna, as many people call animals like sheep and deer, moose, cougars, and those sorts of things, sometimes certainly requires a bit more specialized equipment at times with big lenses that allows you to, again, focus in closer if you want something more than a habitat, animal in habitat shots, which are great to do as well. In this case, a black and white image of the bighorn sheep, the younger ram, was done with a 600 mm lens. And I like the monochrome effect more than the original color image. And I selected an image which provided a bit of a halo around the outside, just so to allow the head to focus in the middle. And I enjoyed the textures and character that the monochrome provided. I don't think you always need to get the biggest ram in order to make a good shot. This younger guy was face on just right, and I enjoyed his particular stance. Now this is a much bigger ram, as you can see, and he's not a full curl, but he's coming around towards 3/4 curl. And I took this image fairly closely, within about 25 meters with the 400 mm lens. I liked it only because he had a bit of grass that he's been chewing on, sticking out, giving a little bit more visual interest to pretty much a standard side-on profile shot. We're lucky around Kamloops that there's various bands of bighorn sheep, these are California bighorns, that live in places where they see a fair amount of human traffic, and they're not very sensitive to the presence of humans. So these animals in this particular herd see people in cars on probably a daily basis. So they didn't move around very much when I stopped my vehicle, and I just used the vehicle as a blind and took a whole lot of shots. And you don't have to chase them around. You just stay patient and calm, and they'll wander around and usually provide a nice image. It's good to get nice detail if you can get the lighting just right, so you can get the details of their fur and the growth rings and their horns and that sort of thing. Once again, macro photography provides a challenge, but I was fortunate this 12-spotted skimmer landed in a position that allowed me to have a look up underneath it, which is not a position you often get a chance to do with dragonflies. And this is one of a rarer species around Kamloops called the 12-spotted skimmer. And they seem to be expanding their range in the west here. And there's populations around Kamloops which they're a big skimmer, and they're relatively easy to photograph. And it's nice to be able to get a shot that shows all the key features, such as obviously the 3 big spots on each of the wings. There are other spotted skimmers like the 8-spotted and others that you can find around, but 12 spots are the one to look for here. Skippers are an interesting butterfly, and they can provide identification challenges for sure. But as with many things in nature, taking nice pictures and enjoying them can be a reward in itself. And we don't all have to be an expert in identifying things. In fact, quite often it takes an expert to identify things. So I have a very helpful cadre of friends that are experts, and they usually help me overcome my mistakes and inadequate knowledge. This happens to be a woodland skipper, one of the very common species around Kamloops and other places. And On the day of photographing this one, there were dozens of skippers of two different species in around some alfalfa and rabbit brush flowers near Kamloops. And I was able to get a good side profile of this one, which managed to keep everything in focus, including the alfalfa flowers, and also enable us to identify it as to what it is. They're an active little beast, hence the name skipper. So you have to be kind of fast. And again, I'm stalking them using my 100 millimeter macro and handheld, moving as close as I can, and constantly focusing and shooting. I probably shot 100 frames of various skippers in order to get maybe 10 that were adequately in focus and showed all the features that I wanted. So it's a good thing we're not in the old days of shooting slide film at 25 cents a frame. Would get to be a much more expensive hobby that way. The next image is one taken on Galiano Island, and it was something that where the light just happened to create what often people might think of as a painting-like image. Very soft lighting and not a lot of harsh shadows, which gave a really interesting impression to me as I was looking for the images. And I decided to go with it and just basically focus, sharpen it up a little bit in post-processing and use it as a rather soft, not really hazy, but a soft image, and an image that some people think, well, was it painted or was it photographed? And that's something I often find interesting when people make comments about your pictures look like a photograph, or sometimes they'll say it looks like a painting. And I often wonder what people think of paintings and sometimes paintings that look like photographs and in their realism, and how people jump back and forth between their assessments. That's rather interesting to me.